But first, we begin here. I'm not ready to move on from this just yet. I know the media is very ready, desperate to, in fact, move on. But there's something to be learned here. So I want to focus on it again. Now, backing up just for a moment, of course, it's difficult to exactly decipher what Nick Cannon is saying in his rambling, racist tirade against white people. He appears to, for example, think that melanin is some sort of almost magical potion that imbues compassion and virtue and intelligence on people. But the basic points are clear. Cannon believes that white people are lesser, they're savages, they're barbarians, they're suffering from a deficiency, they lack compassion, they lack self-esteem, they lack soul. The only way they can act is evil, and more. In fact, I guess we'll play it for you. If you haven't seen it yet, we'll go ahead and play this clip just to refresh your memory. If you have seen it, this is what Nick Cannon has to say about white people. Watch.
When we talk about the power of melanated people, when we talk about who we really are as guys and understanding that our melanin is so powerful and it connects us in a way that the reason why they fear black, the reason why they fear is because the lack that they have of it. So then when you see what, Dr. Francis C. Welsing talked about is that fear in that
just genetic annihilation,
deficiency of when you have a person that has the lack of pigment, the lack of melanin, that they know that they will be annihilated. So therefore, however they got the power, they have the lack of compassion. That melanin comes with compassion. Melanin comes with soul. That we call it soul. We soul brothers and sisters. That's the melanin that connects us. So the people that don't have it are a little, and I'm gonna say this carefully, are a little less, and where the term actually comes from, because I'm bringing it all the way back around to Minister Farrakhan, to where they may not have the compassion or the when they were sent to the mountains of Caucasus, when they didn't have the power of the sun, that the sun then started to deteriorate them. So then they're acting out of fear, they're acting out of low self-esteem, they're acting out of a deficiency. So therefore, the only way that they can act is evil. The only way they have to rob, steal, rape, kill, and
fight or flight,
in order to survive.
Exactly.
So then these people who didn't have what we had, and when I say we, I speak of the melanated people.
Right.
They had to be savages. They had to be barbaric. Because they're in these Nordic mountains. They're in these rough, torrential environments. So they're acting as animals.
Right.
So they're the ones that are actually closer to animals. They're the ones that are actually the true savages.
Whatever else we can say about it and about Cannon, we should be grateful in some ways that Cannon has perform the valuable service of demonstrating what racism actually sounds like, what it is, because the word is misused and abused and misapplied so often that it can be easy to forget that it's a real thing, especially with the left having made the term racist interchangeable with has opinions that differ from my own. 99% of the time when someone on the left is using the term, that's what they actually mean. But that's obviously not what racism actually is. Racism is the belief that a certain race of people are lesser, savage, barbarian, deficient, which is verbatim what Nick Cannon said about white people. So if your child ever asks you what racism is, well, you could say, "Here, sweetie, I'll show you what it is," and then play the Nick Cannon video for them, and that will clear it up. Of course, this goes without saying, but if a white celebrity or white non-celebrity said forget about it. If a white person used any one of those terms that Cannon used about white people, if a white person used it in relation to black people, you just take any 5-second snippet from that 2-minute clip, and if that was and you put that into the mouth of a white person, well, they're going to be condemned by everyone, all parties, all corners, everywhere in America. They would immediately lose every job they have and every job they might have had in the future. And this would all happen with lightning speed. There would be no one, except maybe on the fringes of the fringe of the fringe, speaking up in defense of him. That's because, contrary to claims of systemic racism and inherent racism in American culture, anti-black racism is not only rejected by the mainstream, but it is probably the view that is most rejected by the mainstream. It would be difficult to think of anything that is more rejected in mainstream culture than anti-black racism, and not just by the mainstream. It's rejected almost everywhere in the mainstream, in America, in the mainstream and in most of its tributaries. And that's a good thing. It's a sign of progress. Doesn't mean that anti-black racism doesn't exist. It just means that anti-black racism has a very difficult time finding safe harbor and a sounding board and a cheering section. This is not the case for anti-white racism, which is often ignored or tacitly approved or outright defended. And we've seen all three of these happen with the Nick Cannon story, which is why it's so instructive and worth focusing on. Viacom CBS, of course, terminated their relationship with the bigot Nick Cannon, which is a pretty severe financial penalty, to be sure. But and of course, but I also say that tentatively because it wouldn't surprise me at all if they hire him back next week or even tomorrow. So we'll see how long this sticks. But the corporation very conspicuously avoided denouncing Cannon's anti-white racism in their statement on why they were firing him. You would think that that would be the reason they fired him, but it's not. Their official reason for firing him has nothing to do with calling white people savage barbarians. Instead, they were focused on comments that Cannon made calling black people the true Hebrews and claiming that blacks can't be anti-Semitic because they're the real Semitic people. Now, this is false, it's bizarre, it's objectionable, but it's tame in comparison with essentially claiming that the white race is subhuman, which is what Nick Cannon said there. Okay. Viacom CBS ignored that part of it, which seems to suggest that if Cannon hadn't mentioned Jewish people, if he had just skipped over that part and had stuck to dehumanizing the entire white race instead, he'd still have a job today. Now, most of the media coverage, we talk about the reaction to this, most of the media coverage has followed Viacom's lead, choosing to pretend that one of the country's most famous and ubiquitous celebrities didn't just claim that a whole race of people is comprised of evil savages. There's an article on the website Essence that summarizes the racist diatribe of Nick Cannon as a conversation about, quote, violence at the hands of white people. And then there are other articles, a lot of them, that basically try to paint Cannon as the aggrieved party, talking about how he's, demanding ownership of his shows on Viacom, and making no mention again of his explicitly racist attack against whites. This has been the general strategy from most corners. Just pretend that he didn't say it at all. That's the strategy. Pretend this is an anti-Semitism controversy. In fact, Nick Cannon, after initially being defiant about it, and even saying that he's the one who owed an apology, finally backed down. Well, I say finally, it took him 12 hours and he backed down. And he issued the inevitable groveling apology last night, but he doesn't apologize at all. In his apology, he doesn't apologize at all for calling white people savage barbarians. He, like everybody else, is pretending that that didn't happen. And instead, his statement, I'll read some of it to you. His statement, or probably his PR team statement, says, "First and foremost, I extend my deepest and most sincere apologies to my Jewish brothers and sisters for the hurtful and divisive words that came out of my mouth during my interview with Richard Griffin. They enforce the worst stereotypes of a proud and magnificent people, and I feel ashamed of the uninformed and naive place that these words came from. The video of this interview has since been removed. While the Jewish experience encompasses more than 5,000 years and there is so much I have yet to learn, I have at least a minor history lesson over the past few days, and to say that it is eye-opening would be a vast understatement. I want to express my gratitude to the rabbis, community leaders, and institutions who reached out to me to enlighten me. Instead of chastising me, I want to assure my Jewish friends, new and old, that this is only the beginning of my education. I am committed to deeper connections, more profound learning, and strengthening the bond between our two cultures today and every day going forward." Okay. Great. That covers the anti-Semitic portion. What about calling all of your white fans evil, savage, soulless, subhuman barbarians? What about that part? That doesn't matter, apparently. We're not going to talk about that. So this is all ignoring and tacitly accepting anti-white racism. That's what that looks like. But as I said, there's always plenty of people who are ready to outright defend it. So you could have gone yesterday, especially, to Nick Cannon's Twitter or his Facebook, and you could have found hundreds, probably thousands of people expressing their support for him, many of whom explicitly endorsing his racist comments. And I know that we like to say, when we see this kind of stuff on Twitter or Facebook, we like to say, that's not the real world. That's just Twitter or Facebook. That's the internet. No, it's the real world. The internet exists in the real world. It's not the Matrix. This is the real world. It's a communication mechanism. It's a communication tool that real people use. And so if you see thousands of people on the internet saying to Nick Cannon, I agree with what you said about white people, what does that mean? It means that there are thousands of people that agree. The fact that they're expressing it on the internet doesn't make it any less real, which is the dumbest. I've talked about this before, kind of a side note, but this, I guess it's wishful thinking, but I find it so stupid that you hear all the time this distinction people want to make between the real world and the internet. These are human beings who are expressing how they feel and what they really think. That is, I hate to tell you, that's real. And so if you go to the internet and you happen to notice, wow, there are a lot of scumbags here, I'm sorry to say that means there are a lot of scumbags in reality. Those scumbags, they don't just materialize on the internet. And they're not all bots either. Most of them, totally real. And not only that, but what that tells us is probably the internet gives us the most accurate insight into how people actually are. Yes, if you bump into them at the supermarket, they're going to be polite to you face to face. But if you want to know what they actually feel like and what they actually think, wait until they're hiding behind a keyboard, and especially behind anonymous accounts, and then you get an idea of who these people really are. And that's the case on the internet in general. Anyway, that's just a side note. In this case, you go to the internet, you go to social media, and you see many comments in support. And what that means, again, is that there are many people who support Nick Cannon, and not just anonymous people on the internet either. There have been, some of the defenders are some of the most powerful forces in media, like Sean Diddy Combs, who offered the racist Nick Cannon a job and expressed solidarity with him, saying, "We are for our people first." That's what he tweeted. Famous athletes have gotten in on the action. Dwayne Wade deleted it, but originally he tweeted something praising Cannon's leadership and saying, "We are with you." The normalization of anti-white racism, which is what this is, does have consequences, real-world consequences. As I've documented in the past and talked about in the past, there have been a slew of brutally violent attacks against white people in recent weeks. And though none of them have been prosecuted as hate crimes, even though doing something like pouring paint on a BLM mural apparently is a hate crime, in spite of that, it's difficult to believe that there's no racial motivation to any of these assaults. Because what else can we expect? When a certain demographic is constantly portrayed as the villain, and all the evil in the world is blamed on them, and hatred and degradation of this group is ignored or outright justified, we can't be surprised to see this carefully cultivated resentment and suspicion spilling over into violence and worse. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.